More than 2,000 British nationals served in the Israeli military during the Gaza genocide, our investigation has found. They were among 50,000 foreign nationals serving in the IDF. Joining me now to discuss these extraordinary figures is my colleague, John McAvoy.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
John, this is a great investigation that you've just done. Can you tell us how you managed to get hold of these figures about how many British nationals and other nationalities were in the Israeli military?
Yeah, so we've been in contact with a lawyer in Israel who files a lot of freedom of information requests. And he filed a request basically asking for all of the foreign nationals who were serving in the IDF during the genocide. And we weren't, that confident about getting information back because we've really struggled on the UK side. The UK says it doesn't collect any data on the number of British nationals serving in a military that's committing genocide, which is incredible in and of itself. But what we got via the Israeli authorities, specifically the IDF, was a list of all of the foreign nationals. So as you mentioned, over 50,000 foreign nationals, the largest cohorts coming from the likes of the US, France and Germany and Ukraine and Russia. And amongst those 50,000 were 2,000 Britons, which is quite incredible really to think that there could be in the order of, thousands of Britons living amongst us. Who have been in Gaza and committed atrocities.
And previously, we thought that figure was as low as about 50, didn't we? I mean, because the last few years we've been working on this, and the only data that we could get from the UK authorities was about, they said about 50 British nationals were what were called lone soldiers. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so a lone soldier is basically a soldier who fights for the IDF without family in Israel to support them. So there are some Israelis who may not have family in Israel who are fighting for the IDF, but there are many who come from various different countries without family, without any dependents, and they fight for the IDF. And we found through a Knesset report, an Israeli parliamentary report, that around 50 Britons had signed up via the kind of lone soldier program. But we knew that there were many more dual nationals, and the problem was it was very difficult to nail down the data on it. And so, we finally managed to find out, and it's caused a massive scandal in the UK. I mean, it must be horrific for Palestinians living in the UK to know that, there may be, Israeli British dual nationals coming back, living in their local area, perhaps. But it's also caused a kind of international scandal as well. So several different major media organisations across Europe, South Africa and elsewhere have reported on this, particularly in Belgium. They're quite interested in this. So, it's been quite useful for various different jurisdictions to learn, that their citizens may have been involved in war crimes in Gaza.
Yeah, and I think it's the scale, right, that's really shocked people, because there have been isolated reports throughout the genocide of people with certain nationalities coming back to various European countries, and lawyers have tried to file lawsuits in those countries to try and get them arrested. But then to know that those cases were just the tip of the iceberg and that there were hundreds or potentially even thousands more people like that, it's quite extraordinary just what this one FOI has been able to reveal, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. In the UK, a kind of report was submitted to the Metropolitan Police's War Crimes Unit regarding, I think, around 10 Britons that they had managed to identify and could link to alleged war crimes in Gaza. And so that was just 10. Now we know that there's potentially 2,000. But what's interesting as well is the various different kind of prosecutorial avenues that can be taken to, take action against these people. And I think quite depressingly in the UK, one of the most hopeful avenues is the Foreign Enlistment Act, which is a relatively disused act. It goes back to 1870, I think, which basically says you can prosecute a British citizen if they fight for an army that is at war with a country with whom the UK is at peace. So it's quite incredible to think that we have to go all the way back to 1870 to find some form of legislation that might help in prosecuting Britons who've been engaged in genocide.
Yeah, and I think no one's ever been prosecuted successfully under the Foreign Enlistment Act. And it was last debated in Parliament, I think, in the 1970s. And Margaret Thatcher, at the time, she was the Conservative opposition leader. She was quite worried that her constituents in Finchley, who'd returned from fighting for Israel in the 1973 war, could be prosecuted by some kind of anti-mercenary legislation. And there were lots of figures in Whitehall as well who really wanted to water down any attempt. During the 70s, there was more of an international backlash against mercenaries, and they were very keen to stop more powerful anti-mercenary legislation being put in place. We've seen the comments on social media. Some people have pointed out in South Africa it's just against the law, full stop, to serve in a foreign military. And lots of people have pointed out what they feel is kind of a two-tier policing going on here, not in the way that the right talk about it, but when people went out to fight in Syria for various armed groups, including Kurdish armed groups, they were often investigated by counterterrorism police on their return. There are lots of cases of people having their citizenship stripped as well, so they go and join armed groups abroad.
Yeah, there's absolutely a double standard, and you can see how this entire thing is fundamentally politicized. A lot of these Britons who have come back from Israel and come back from fighting in Gaza, they haven't been, subjected to as much as a police interview at the border. I mean, the Metropolitan Police's War Crimes Unit, as far as we're aware, has not issued any prosecution, any charges against any of these people. So it's quite incredible to see the double standards when it comes to, Britons who fight for what is perceived to be a geopolitical enemy, and Britons who fight for Israel, which the UK government still considers to be a key ally.
Are there any kind of checks in place, say that these people, when they're back in the UK, that they work in the NHS or with vulnerable children, after what they've potentially done in Gaza? Is there any kind of extra screening in place to make sure that people like that don't end up in kind of roles with vulnerable people?
As far as we're aware, there's no checks in place whatsoever. So you could be going to your local doctor's surgery, you could be going to get, going to a hospital, an NHS hospital, and you might be being treated by somebody who's recently returned from participating in a genocide, which is quite incredible that public bodies can be effectively employing these people whatsoever. It's also important to note that the Israeli government itself was quite concerned about the legal status of dual nationals, British dual nationals specifically serving in the IDF. And they were tracking, British legislation very closely to make sure that, those reserves of foreign nationals going to fight for the IDF might not be subject to arrest upon return. And generally speaking, they were quite comforted by the lack of legislation in the UK that could be used to prosecute them. And it's worth noting that roughly 8 to 10% of Israel's army is made up of foreign nationals. So it's incredibly important that they maintain access to this kind of tap of dual nationals, multinationals who are coming from abroad and fighting for the IDF.
Yeah, we've seen during the genocide that they've announced they're going to try and recruit more soldiers from abroad, haven't they, to try and plug manpower shortages. I mean, that other story that you just mentioned about Israeli authorities having concerns about the legality of what was going on, you found that in leaked Israeli Ministry of Justice documents, didn't you? And that they were worried by an interview that Saeed Avazi had given to Middle East Eye, where she had said that if you don't fight for Britain, you shouldn't fight for anyone if you're a British citizen. Saeed Avazi was a senior Conservative minister under David Cameron, and she resigned from cabinet in 2014 over the war in Gaza. I mean, but it's interesting, isn't it, that just her criticism in a Middle East Eye article seemed to spark this panic inside Israel's Ministry of Justice.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, they're incredibly sensitive to anybody speaking about that kind of double standard where you can fight for a foreign state, but you can't fight for, a non-state organisation. And that clearly set off alarm bells within the Israeli Ministry of Justice, such that they commissioned a powerhouse legal firm to provide them with legal advice on the status of those Britons. So I think they're going to be watching our reporting, but they're also going to be watching the response to our reporting very closely, because I think what it's triggered is mass outrage across the world. I mean, from Asia to Africa and to Europe to the Americas about, foreign nationals serving for an army committing genocide. So I think they'll be quite concerned about judicial amendments, changes to prevent this from happening in the future.
And John, what's the reaction been like to this article? Have you had journalists from all over Europe contacting you, asking for more details?
Yeah, we've had tons of requests, basically. And I think the thing that journalists and activists and just citizens want to know is, do we have the names of those people who've been fighting in the IDF? Unfortunately, that's much more difficult to get hold of. Obviously, the IDF wouldn't kind of publish that data for obvious reasons. So what it's been important to do, and Hamza Yusuf, British Palestinian journalist, wrote for Declassified about a year and a half ago, I think. He managed to use social media, various different open source information in order to actually, find and name some of those people that were involved in Gaza. So that's a very long and arduous process. It's very difficult. We know that the IDF has been instructing its soldiers not to post online, not to post pictures, not to post videos. Of course, we saw early on in the genocide, one British citizen, for example, was going through a Palestinian woman's underwear and her clothing drawers. So the IDF has kind of clamped down on that because they're aware that once they get back to the UK or elsewhere, they might be liable to criminal charges.
Thanks, John, for this incredible piece of research. If you want to help Declassified do more investigations like this, please hit on the link below. And if you want this video to reach a wider audience, please help to share it and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.